Religious and cultural purity. We know the story of the Good Samaritan very well. It's a very popular story and it's often shared. Often people, when they hear the story of the Good Samaritan, it's reminded, yes, we're meant to help people who are in distress. We know that story well. But do we actually know what was going on when Jesus was talking about Samaritans and people of Jewish background? What was their relationships like? The Jewish people that Jesus was speaking to when he gave this parable, they had a very monoculture view of their own culture and their own religion. And they had quite a hatred towards the Samaritans. The Samaritans were Jewish people. They were from the kingdom of Israel, whereas the rest of the Jews were from the kingdom of Judah. And traditionally, you go back hundreds of years, 800 years into the Old Testament, from the time of Christ, and they were one kingdom, the Promised Land. There had been a war and there had been separation. Up in the north, you had the kingdom of Israel, which became known as the Samaritans, and then you had the kingdom of Judah. What happened was that the people up in the north, they were invaded, and many of them were taken off into exile for a period of time. When they came back, there was this meshing of culture for them. They meshed some of their culture with different cultures. And there were intermarriages that were happening. And the people down in Jerusalem looked up at the people in Samaria and they said, they're not proper Jews. Those people have given in and they've not got the cultural purity that they're meant to have and the religious purity they're meant to have. A couple of hundred years later, down in Jerusalem, there was an invasion and the Jewish people were taken off into exile, into Babylon. You've probably heard this, book of Isaiah talks about this as well. When they come back about 80 years later to Jerusalem, at this stage the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed, they come back and the Jewish people who came back from exile were very enthusiastic to maintain Jewish cultural purity, to make sure that they didn't intermarry with other cultures. And in doing that, they wanted to build a temple again. People up in the north said no temple should be built in Jerusalem because they said God can be worshipped everywhere. And this then led to other problems. There were other wars that happened a few hundred years before the time of Christ, and the people in the north sided with the Greeks and the Egyptians and others against those in Jerusalem. And so the people in the north, those in Samaria, were hated by the people in Jerusalem and in Galilee. And so Jesus has this parable about the Good Samaritan. Who is our neighbour? Jesus is not talking about our neighbour in the house next door. He was talking about the neighbouring country. The people who in Jerusalem viewed those people up there as inferior, that they compromised what their faith was like. They didn't have a proper understanding of culture, of religion, and so on. And so there was this hatred. And sometimes I think this hatred can find its way even until today. Some people use this language of invasion sometimes in relation to the Indigenous, which sometimes can escalate people to feel like almost that there is this hatred towards people of an Anglo background. Almost like I was the cause of the invasion that happened here. But I think one of the beauties of what's happened here in Australia, and we can see that with Theresa, with Lisa, with Uncle John and with others, that there has been an exchange of culture. Yes, perhaps there hasn't been ritual and cultural purity in the way it was, perhaps in the way the Jewish people had hoped it was going to be at the time of Jesus, that everything had to be perfect. But there has this been exchange of culture. And that's what we saw at the beginning of the Mass today, and a beautiful exchange of culture. And that's part of our story of an Australian people, but it's also part of the story of the Indigenous people. Some of those stories have been stories of great hurt, but some of those stories have been stories of great joy, of education, of communities coming together, of people working together, and it's a great thing. And that's, I think, where the story of the Good Samaritan comes in. Do we take the side of perhaps the priest and the Levite and say, well, no, we're not going to help this person because it might be too difficult for us? Or do we take the position of perhaps of the way the Samaritans viewed the Jewish people? Those people are our enemies. We're not going to help them. Or do we take the approach of the Good Samaritan to say, yes, we've got a challenging background, a challenging history in our relationships with each other. But what we're going to do is stand above that and say, we're going to be people of God. And that people of God brings service to those who are most vulnerable, those who are most in need. And so we step up, we stand up, we get up, we use our voice, we use our actions, we use our hands, we use our heart to serve. Not necessarily saying, perhaps the Good Samaritan could have gone and said to this Jewish person who was beaten up, you people, you've done terrible things to us over the years, you've beaten us, hurt us. He didn't say that. He just got up and helped the guy. And he brought the love of God. And that's what we are called to do as Australians and as Christians today. This week of NAIDOC Week is a reminder that all of us are called to do what we can to share culture, not to impose a one culture, but to have this beautiful mingling of cultures. We are a multicultural country, and that's the beauty of our country. We aren't just one culture, we are many, come together in the one life, the love of God. And so we thank all those who've come today with us to help us know something of the original culture of this place. We thank especially Theresa for wearing her beautiful possum, what's it called? A possum skin cloak. What was the... Bud Billy, that was the word I was trying to remember. Bud Billy. Thank you for wearing your Bud Billy to remind us of something of the beauty of your culture and how that culture can enrich us. To a certain extent, we have Bud Billies as well that remind us of the culture of Jesus Christ, the way of Jesus. And that's what I wear at Mass. This strange cloak, you could say, is a bit like a Bud Billy. It connects us with Christ, connects us with those who've come before, but it also gives us that encouragement to go forward into the future. So the story of the Good Samaritan, we've heard it so many times, but when you look at the geopolitical situation of what was going on, it's quite fascinating. Do we go down the path of the Jewish people, the priest and the Levite, seeking one culture, one monoculture, one purity of culture and religion? Or do we embrace all people and see the best in everybody and do what we can to bring the love of God to the vulnerable, the sick, those in great need? That's the way of the Good Samaritan. Let's live that out today and always with the Spirit of Jesus Christ.